Nice to meet you virtually. I'm Rohit, MD Urja Vikas from Rajasthan.
Thank you so much for joining, Rohit. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, Ms. Chandra is just getting on, so I think she'll be here in good time. Yeah. Mr. Bhargava, the floor will be yours at about 4:05, 4:06-ish. Not 4:05, 4, I think 4:15-ish, 4:15-ish. So, the floor will be yours. So please feel free to, sort of, pick up whatever you did from the presentation and add on to it based on your, experience in the sector. Yeah. Thank you.
So what we'll do is, since Mr. Mandal is also here, so I'll request him to go first, maybe for a few minutes, and then if required, then I'll jump in.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Sure.
So maybe there might be a mismatch in terms of time. I hope you wouldn't mind.
That's fine. That's fine. It's a panel discussion after, and as I said, Ntpc is an important stakeholder. So we'd be happy to hear from both of you. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Ridhima, ready to go?
Yes, we are live now.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon to all our guests in India who might be watching this in the afternoon, but those who might have joined from other parts of the world, good day to all of you. I'm Arunabha Ghosh. I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to a very important discussion that we're going to have today on the issue that plagues not just India, but pretty much any major economy or any developing country looking to become a major economy. What is the mix of the energy sector? But within that energy mix, how efficient can we get with the fossil fuels on which we are still primarily dependent? I want to start by welcoming our esteemed guests. I know Mr. Gurdeep Singh, the chairman and MD of Ntpc, has been suddenly pulled away for some urgent briefings regarding Ntpc, but he has been extremely kind to reach out to me and extend his best wishes for this event. I'm therefore also very grateful for Mr. Mohit Bhargav, who I'll introduce in a little bit, for having joined this session. I'm also grateful to Mr. Mondol, Dr. Pereira from ADB, Mr. KVS Baba, Chairman and Managing Director of POSOCO, Ms. Anjali Chandra, who is a member of the Punjab State Electricity Regulatory Commission, and Mr. Rohit Gupta, Managing Director of the Rajasthan Urja Vikas Nigam Limited. As you can see, we have representations from the largest energy utility in the country and one of the largest in the world, but also from some of our most critical state. Let me also extend my deep gratitude to some of our funders and supporters who provide the resources for us to be able to do the kind of independent analysis that CEEW does. I want to extend my thanks to the Hewlett Foundation, Oak Foundation, and the SED Fund. I want to also clarify that CEEW follows a very, very strict governance rule of the funder and client being separate. And therefore, it is our independent analysis upon which we rest all our work and our reputation, and it is that we present before you. That independent analysis is critical, as I was mentioning, for something as important as the energy transition. Just a few weeks ago, at the ministerial segment of the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy, we showcased as a country the tremendous moves that India has made on the energy transition across a range of sectors. India showcased 26 different initiatives and was listed among the leading countries in the world leading the energy transition and acknowledged by senior members of the United Nations. It was at that event itself that Ntpc also declared, and we'll hear about this from Mr. Bhargav perhaps in a little while, that by 2032, Ntpc will itself deploy about 60 gigawatts of solar, larger than the entire solar capacity that we have today. Now, as we celebrate those aggressive and path-breaking moves that India as a country and Ntpc and others as individual companies are making, we still have to ask ourselves the very important question: what is the future of coal? And what is the future of a very large coal-based thermal power generation fleet that we have today? And we have to ask this question not in binary terms, that solar today and coal tomorrow, or coal today and solar tomorrow. We have to ask it in a way in which that we can have a smoother transition towards a low carbon pathway, but that transition is also economically sustainable for the asset owners, that transition is socially just for the workers engaged in that sector, and most importantly, that transition makes sense for the millions of taxpayers for whom the efficient use of our electricity system matters, because that's what drives the economy. We have to ask ourselves, what is the way in which we can improve the efficiency of our coal power fleet, wherein we rely more, or can we rely more, on the more efficient parts of that fleet. Therein then will lie questions around what kind of contracts have we signed and what kind of contracts will be signed. We will also have to ask ourselves questions around what would be the appropriate phase out or phase down approach to decommissioning, issues on which the Central Electricity Authority has already put out some ideas, and we would like to discuss that further. We have to also ask ourselves, not just as an electricity system as a whole, but as power plant by power plant, what would be that cost of transition? And it is that kind of analysis also that we will be presenting today. What does it mean to write down an asset? What does it mean to have a just transition for the workers employed in particular assets and so forth? So it is that combination of the macro and the micro that we wanted to present to you today. As I said, not to have a binary conversation between coal versus renewables, but to have a deeper dive into the very backbone of our electricity sector, the world's fourth or fifth largest electricity sector by capacity, and likely to become even perhaps the third largest electricity sector in the world in a few years from now. What we do in India will matter not just for India, but will matter for the planet. It will also matter for many other emerging economies that are looking to India for that guidance, for that direction of how a smoother energy transition is possible. Let me stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Weber Pratap Singh, who will present the brief findings from both the studies that we are discussing today before we turn back to Mr. Mohit Bhargav. Weber, over to you.
Thanks, Arunabha. So let me just share the screen first. Is the screen visible?
Yes, Weber.
Thanks, Arunabha. Hello, everyone. My name is Vaibhav Pratap Singh, and I work as a program lead with CEEW Center for Energy Finance. Today, I will be walking you through the presentation, the opportunities and costs of an early thermal decommissioning in India. But before I delve deeper into the study, let me give you a context of CEEW. CEEW is among Asia's leading policy research institution with 7 focus areas and a dedicated Center for Energy Finance. These focus areas look into the problems of short-term through energy access or renewables, or longer-term through power sector, or modeling through low-carbon pathways and risk adaptation. And other 2 areas are equally important, are how industries look like. The industry of future would look like under the 2 segments. And binding it together is the CEEW Center for Energy Finance, where we design financial solutions to drive this transition further and also map the market. As already highlighted by Arunabha over here, let me give you a bit more of the context of why the discussion as well as the studies are important over here. India's electricity sector contributes around 40% of country's GHG emissions. Recognizing the decarbonization opportunity, India has already set a massive target of 450 gigawatts on top of the 175 gigawatts by 2020. But at the same time, India also has around 10% of the global coal capacity, with around 200 gigawatt of operational installed plants that importantly supply 70% of electricity needs of the country. But at the same time, if you look at the fleet, how the performance has been, and over the last 2 decades, a large number of assets came on board and had now the utilization rates have moved into down south at roughly 53% in FY21, and at present when the electricity needs have moved to the north and are at the highest level at around 58%. This has been because of the lower than anticipated growth in the energy demand. This is because you have to plan in advance, as a coal power asset usually takes 4 to 6 years to start from scratch to start supplying electricity. So you have to plan in advance. So this will help you understand how important this is to plan the electricity systems as well and infuse. And it's a massive financial activity, since around at present rates, it costs around 8 to 10 crores per megawatt to set up a coal power plant. So 500 megawatt plant, or just to give you the context, the 200 gigawatt roughly approximately equal to hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars invested into the capacity. Not just the lower than anticipated growth, but the minimal retirement of assets, despite the steep targets under the National Energy Plan 2018, is also responsible for this huge pileup of inefficient plants in the system. And an increasing contribution of RE in the system, which with improving economics, is pushing coal assets on the lower PLF, as was visible in the past year. So let me delve into the first study under the name of Coal Power's Trilemma, Variable Cost, Efficiency, and Financial Solvency, and its findings. But what was the objective of the study? Given the GHG emissions that these coal power plants contribute, it was important to understand how these thermal power plants are utilized and what could be the different ways of categorizing this utilization. How efficient is the generation, and what are the drivers that drive this efficiency? And importantly, what are the economics of this generation or the variable cost? It's important because in India, most of the coal feed power plants are under two-part tariffs, with fixed cost and the variable cost. The fixed cost cover for the keeping a part of the capacity available at all the times, and variable cost covers for the elements like the coal or others that are required to be paid only if it's generating. So, and another important question is, are there any opportunities for improving the efficiency of these thermal assets? And if they are, what is the cost implication of them? And what eventually it would look like? So based on this objectives in mind, we analyzed around 194 gigawatts of 94 gigawatts to be exact of capacity over the period of 30 months, starting from September 2017 to February 2020. For the variable cost, we relied on merit total and used the data for 180 gigawatts of plants. For monthly coal consumption, to understand how actually the coal was being consumed and was being supplied. So just to go into what are the grades of the coal, we use CEA and CAL saver. To understand what the future would look like, or what is the optimal generation mix should look like, we relied on CEA optimal generation and the NEP 2018 and the CEA analysis for 2030. And for ramping capacities, we relied on the TOSOCO report on it. To give you since this is an important topic, let me walk you through the methodology as well. For all these 190 gigawatts of plants, we segregated them based on the age and ownership. That is it state-owned, center-owned, or private-owned? An assessment of their capacities, their generation, and their variable cost. And importantly, the station heat rate. What is station heat rate? Station heat rate is the amount of energy required to produce a unit of electricity. So instead of going by the benchmark or the ballpark figures that are available in the tariff orders out there for SHR, we relied on the amount of coal consumed and the grade of coal consumed over the period to understand what was the actual station heat rate or the efficiency of these plants over the period of time. After gathering all this data for the 30 months of period, we came up with a function. If these plants are to be reallocated based on the efficiency, what could be the function? We found that the station heat rate is dependent on age, the unit size, the PLF, and the import share. Also on the variable cost side, if you look at the formula of variable cost, you will find that variable cost is majorly equivalent to the cost of coal into the amount of coal consumed. So the cost of coal, for the cost of coal, we also relied on the transportation cost associated with it, for which we used the notified freight rates and using the distance between the coordinates and the rail network, we calculated it. So based on if under the new system where we promote efficiency, if we reallocate all these assets, we found that the variable cost would be function of the efficiency, the age, the average unit size of the plant, and the delivered coal price along with it. And not just the coal price into the quantity, breaking it up in, it could be take the following form. And generation, once we had a chance to look at all these data, we realigned all the plants based on these efficiency parameters of the station heat rate and based on the demand over the period on the analyzed period. We came up with the efficiency based merit order versus the variable cost merit order that's used today. And the reassignment was done based on the SHR and the variable cost as given by the following equation. And based on all this, and not surprisingly, we found that cheaper plants are not necessarily the efficient ones. If you look at the formula, it's simple, no rocket science. Its variable cost is equal to the amount of coal consumed into the cost of coal. So if you are at a pit head or have older FSAs or the fuel supply agreements, you can easily procure them at a cheaper cost and you will be easier to run. And under two-part tariffs where you have fixed costs, you are always paying up for that, and variable cost, you will be getting dispatched if you are cheaper. Under the scenario of the demand that we assessed for the period, we found that almost 50 gigawatts of coal capacity was surplus to the system. And this is assuming only that the highest of the plant, based on the efficiency, has a PLF of 85%. And the lowest goes with the based on the efficiency in the decreasing order, decreasing order has the PLF of 55% to allow for slack for around R&M in the system. And based on this, we found that an overall efficiency improvement of 6%. That leads to a saving, that could lead to a potential saving of 42 million tons of coal and an associated reduction in GHG emissions along with it. What this results in is the reduction in variable cost under this reassigned tariff under a central clearing system of 9,000 crores. And another saving of 10,000 crores could also be achieved, assuming that the retrofits won't have to be done for these 30 gigawatts of plants that are identified. And importantly, to highlight over here, these 30 gigawatts of plants are the same that CEA has identified under the National Electric Plan 2018. So there could be issues like what about the technical constraints around the system? So to walk you through the technical constraints, the regional generation variation under the reassigned tariff order dispatch system was only 10%, was less than within 10% range. And transmission does not seem to be a bottleneck. Barring the states of West Bengal, Odisha, Karnataka, and Haryana, all other states would see a generation variation within 20%. For ramping capacities, there would be a significant dip of 26%, but importantly, last year we only used 5% of them. And importantly, under the 2022 and 2030 scenarios, this coal capacity would be enough to meet 108% of the demand and 77% of the demand out there. And this is important because 34% gigawatt of another capacity is there in the pipeline. So that would be coming up and could fill the gap until 2030 as well. So after establishing the need for decommissioning based on the efficiency, let's move on to what could be the potential cost of an early decommissioning in India through the findings of the study. The next study. The study maps majorly the coal-based, as Arunabha had mentioned, what could be the early decommissioning cost. For this, we studied about 130 plants. That's roughly 45% of India's current installed capacity. And this was majorly based on the availability of the tariff order for these plants. The study further categorizes it based on age, variable cost, efficiency, and combinations to understand if India decides a certain pathway, what would be the cost implications of the decision. To help you understand how we actually evaluated, so as mentioned before, the capacity charges are to be paid off for keeping a part of the capacity available. And these cover for the payment towards the debt holders, the equity holders, that's in case like Ntpc, and other fixed payouts. It could be for the workforce, regular RNMs, O&M expenses, and other costs. That could include the cost of secondary fuel. And these are to be paid off on regular basis other than the variable cost that covers for the variable charges. Based on this, interestingly, we found that in India, there is a severe lack of availability of financial data pertaining to individual plants. So how to calculate the cost of decommissioning? We came up with the methodology where instead of relying on either plant level balance sheets or on the using PPA statements that are not available or the contracts that have 25 years breakdown of all these elements that are not available, but tariff orders, they are usually available in the public domain. So what is the PV of the present value of payment towards equity? What is the present value of interest on capital? That is the earnings for the banks or NBFCs or even bondholders who have extended loan for building up these assets. Depreciation cost, as per CERC, that covers for the loan repayment factor or the principal repayment factor. In case we found that the loan has already been repaid, this has been subtracted to assume the salvage value of the plant. And other very important stakeholders that need to be paid off were the workforce. And for this, we have assumed a standard figure of 0.1 crore per megawatt based on Ntpc's annual report for FY19. This was done because the tariff orders were not having a breakdown around the cost of workforce, but in case where we found the majorly older plants where there were a liability on the pension side, it increased the bill by around another 5 to 10%, 5% roughly on the fixed cost side. So what are the major findings from the study? From the study, the major finding was that for plants about 25 years and above, the cost of decommissioning is as low as 1 crore per megawatt versus 4.3 crores per megawatt for the entire sample. That translates for the 47 old plants that we analyzed, equivalent to 35 gigawatts in total payouts of 33,000 odd crores or $4.5 billion. While debt and equity holders will have to be paid around $3 billion or to be exact, 21,000 crores 470. And the workforce, to make it a just transition, adds another $1.6 billion. Interestingly, what we found for this entire capacity, that the avoided portion of the annual payouts are roughly stand at 7,500 crores. That is, over the 5-year period, the decommissioning of this site of plant, not commenting on the technical requirement, could be paid off in the next 5 to 6 years. But since many of the studies also point out that India would be peaking in coal capacity around 2030 and it would be falling down. So what could be the cost associated with those also? So we mapped the entire 95 gigawatts and we found that it would cost to decommission a plant 0.37 crores a year earlier. That is for the entire 95 gigawatts. It translates into a 23% saving in capacity charges over the life of the assets. And just to give you the scale of investments, if India is to move into this direction, which we do not recommend, is for 130 plants, it would cost $32 billion to pay off the equity holders, another $16 billion to pay off the equity holders. Moving ahead, the payouts to the workforce at the rate of 0.61 crore. So 3.7 crores is the payout towards the debt and equity holders per megawatt, adds to $8 billion. In a nutshell, just by using this mechanism, we would be able to release this much amount of capital of 32 and 8, $16 billion. And this is important. Why? Because India is a capital constrained country. If you look at the total amount of capital deployed by the banks and NBFCs towards the power sector, it roughly totals to $167 billion. So a 29% saving that could be achieved just by decommissioning, and that money could be deployed for more RE deployment, more storage. That would be important given these technologies are slightly more on the varying nature. Importantly, another important finding was that equity contributes around 29% of the total cost. And under mechanisms that we could deploy like auctions, this could be bought down and could reduce the cost of decommissioning. And also for, let's say, in case the public money is being utilized for state-owned plants, you don't need to shift money from one pocket to the other. So the entire cost of decommissioning could come down. And this could eventually be used to pay off the workforce, which accounts for 14% of the total payouts. So based on the mapping, we found that though we were able to map 95 gigawatts, for moving ahead in case for the entire 200 gigawatt, this mapping needs to be done to understand what should be the decision towards decommissioning, because decommissioning, as we saw for the newer plants, is not a viable option and should not be done because it's a huge investment that the countries had already done and it could be so repurposing in some of the cases and others, or even mothballing that earlier study had assessed. So plant-wise assessment would be necessary. And for how, if the country moves ahead with this path, what would be the workforce related compensation and what could be the transition strategies related to it? Something like voluntary retirement scheme that was used for the banks as they adopted the core banking solutions. Adequate payment for the coal mine workers and owners will also be important because they are reliant for a huge chunk of the revenues from this sector, and as well as the railways that relies for 40% of its revenue from transporting coal. And also the people, and the most importantly, the people who are employed directly. These 5 lakh are the direct employed people by the Coal India and others. But there is a substantial amount of people who are not directly employed but are in the system, and that are 4 to 5 times of this number. So thank you all for your patient hearing, and let me hand it back to Arunabha, and you can post your questions in the chat box as well, or the question and answer window. Thanks.
Thank you, Vaibhav. Thanks for your comprehensive presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, as you saw, the two studies are complementary. One looks at the rationale for improving efficiency in the coal-based fleet overall, and the other looks at a much more detailed, granular approach towards understanding the cost at a plant level of decommissioning rather than taking any averages. But to hear comments on this and more, it gives me great pleasure right now to invite Mr. Mohit Bhargav, who's the Executive Director for Renewable Energy for Ntpc and the CEO of Ntpc Renewable Energy Limited. But Mr. Bhargav has extensive 3.5 decades of experience in commissioning power plants, maintenance activities, procurement and planning. He's overseen the development of Ntpc's corporate plans and setting the annual targets and driving and pushing it towards its strategic initiatives. He is currently heading the renewable energy vertical for Ntpc, which is responsible for the company's move towards renewable energy. And as I mentioned, the recent announcement of getting to 60 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2032. But it is Mr. Bhargav who is, in a way, embodying that transition with that extensive experience in the thermal power sector and now driving this transition towards renewables. So, Mr. Bhargav, we would very much welcome your comments and learn from you about the approach we've set out and your thoughts and your nuances that you would introduce into the dialogue. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ghosh. I think what we'll do, Mr. Mandal is also here. He's a director on board of Ntpc. He's director commercial. He's also, in fact, the chairman of our company, Ntpc Renewable Energy Limited. So what I'll do is I'll request him to have a go first, and then maybe I'll jump in. He also has extensive experience. He's worked at sites. He's headed our regional offices, and he's also director commercial and also in charge of the renewable business. I'll request Mr. Mandal to go first. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. In fact, pardon me, Mr. Mandal, I had saved your introduction for until later, but of course, you're most welcome. Again, Mr. Mandal also has 3.5 years of experience in various leadership positions at Ntpc, and he's been in charge of, again, driving many of the strategic initiatives. Started off his journey with commissioning 3 500 megawatt plants at Khelgaon. He is a strategic planner at Ntpc. He's and as Mr. Bhargav mentioned, most recently taken over as a director commercial, but also chairing the renewable energy arm, the chairman of the board. So, Mr. Mandal, again, we'll welcome your thoughts as well. So, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Arunava. And thanks, Mohit. I think you have done a study. I think before coming to this study, I just like to have tell some background that India has come a long way from widespread deficit once upon a time to now a surplus scenario. Maybe all these things we are discussing today because we have reached almost zero shortage, energy shortage. And this was all possible probably because during 2007 to till 2017, during 11th and 12th plan, there are large-scale coal-based power stations was added. And even today, with a 55% capacity mix in the country, coal generation contributes to 72% of the electricity what is being generated. which has of course decreased from 77%, which was prevalent during 15-16, but today it has come down definitely. But its share is decreasing gradually, definitely. And for that, thanks to the rapid growth in renewable capacity which is being added. I think with massive capacity addition in both in RE and coal, the situation has changed from, I think, which we were earlier facing load shedding. In fact, in our childhood, we used to study in hurricane light, and from now, almost there is no load shedding today. Now, if we, as a country, we are really, we are preparing, we are lot of pressure of climate changes and for cleaner fuel, definitely. And what are the alternatives to us? In the past 5 years, total capacity addition in the country was almost, I think, 63% from RE sources. And it was only hardly 30% from coal. And as per estimate, as the, I think Mr. Vaibhav was discussing the CEA report on optimal generation, and it predicts around peak demand of 340 gigawatt by 2030. And if we consider this COVID impact, maybe that may be slightly 1 or 1.5 year, maybe there may be shift. But still in 2030, maybe there will be a peak demand of 320 to 325 gigawatt. And even though India is having ambitious RE capacity addition by the time, of course, the time will tell whether we will be able to really add the capacity which has been envisaged. Even considering that those capacities are added, there may not be shortages in terms of energy during this daytime. But how do we meet this peak capacity, which will be to the extent of 325 gigawatt? So, as in fact, there is a suggestion from whether it is Government of India and CEA that we may be requiring additional 25 to 30 gigawatt of coal capacity by that time. Because the peak capacity, the timing of peak capacity when it is coming, that time is wind generation will be substantially low, and solar will be, naturally it will be nil. And we have very limited, hydro capacity, and as well as gas price and gas-based power station is there, but it is mostly idle because of high gas price. So it will primarily come from coal capacity to meet those peak demand, for meeting those peak demand during the 2030. So what is what we felt that, okay, definitely there is need for decommissioning of coal-based capacity, but where do we start? How do we start? Whether we should start maybe wherever this heat rate is more. I think, as rightly pointed out during the presentation, that today merit order is based on cost, but necessarily all low-cost power is not an efficient plant, definitely. That is why, as the Ntpc, we suggested in the NEP that, in fact, probably there is need to relook into merit order based on cost or based on efficiency. So probably we should switch over to efficiency. But problem is that how do you implement that? Because today these power stations are either regional specific or state specific. Unless otherwise you pool in their entire resources or you have a pool tariff. Shifting based on the efficiency. There are issues because some states will lose, some states will gain. So there will be a lot of objection from that point of view. But as far as the Ntpc is concerned, we have also suggested that maybe instead of adding this new capacity, which may be required as per the projection what has been given by CEA, that instead of adding a fresh capacity of coal, which may take again at 4 to 5 years time, and thereafter how long that will be operating, we are not very sure. So instead of that, maybe some of the power stations which require maybe large scale R&M, so we can do the R&M of those stations, so that we can meet that peak requirement till 2030 or maybe slightly more. And thereafter, definitely based on this cost, what we will be getting from these battery storage or maybe alternate storage mechanism like hydrogen, etc. And if that is really cost effective, maybe we can switch over to that. But having said that, I think I would just like to highlight some of the initiatives what Ntpc has taken from internally in our company. Before coming to that, I would just like to give an example, like our in the first quarter of this year, our Singrauli power station, one of the unit, which is 37-year-old, which has operated at 102.08% PLA. So, and until that is as efficient as what we have established some 37-year-old. And as far as if you consider our pitted, some of the pitted station, like Singrauli, Bindachal, Rihand, their average ECR is less than 1.7, and total cost also almost at 2 rupees per unit on an average. And whereas the average cost of national average is almost 3 rupees 60 paisa. So the way electricity demand is growing, and as we are all aware that this time it has touched 200 gigawatt recently, and it is expected to grow very rapidly. Is it really a time right now to decommission? As far as we are concerned, it is no. It will definitely come over a period of time, definitely. But we still feel that still coal plant is going to continue maybe for another 15, 20 years at least, or maybe more than that. It will only gradually, it will come down once we really get the solution of storage or maybe alternate storage. I'll say that as Ntpc, our aim has always been that to provide affordable and reliable power. And in fact, we get nowadays a lot of inquiry from, particularly from the industrialized state, that they want more coal-based power plant, coal-based power for at least next 5 years or so, because they are not able to rely on the RE capacity, which is really intermittent and sometimes uncertain. So, in fact, there are a lot of inquiries from many industrialized state.
So, Montal, we can actually get into some of these points perhaps during the panel discussion as well. Some of the details, maybe.
Okay. But I will be leaving. I have.
Oh, okay. Sure. Oh, okay. I thought you were going to stay with us for the discussion as well. Sorry.
Mr. Mohit will be there continuing definitely.
Sure.
Yeah. Some of the initiatives also what we have taken, that we have been, whatever capacity we are adding nowadays. Of course, no, there is no fresh capacity what is being added today, and we have already decided not to acquire any greenfield project. If at all anything happens, it will be the brownfield project only. And it is all based on the supercritical or ultra supercritical technology. So that is one thing, and we have already taken initiative in terms of setting up this SOX and NOx control system in terms of FGD and DNOx. So that we have already done it. We are taking initiative on waste to energy, and as you have already telling that we have targeted, we have increased our RE capacity to double by 2030, around 60 gigawatt. So these initiatives we have already taken. We have also taken initiative in terms of increasing ash utilization to make it more environment friendly. And as far as decommissioning is concerned, I think as you may be already aware that we have already taken a call to decommission our Talcher old power plant, which has already been decommissioned. And in near future, we will be decommissioning some of our older power stations which we acquired from the state GENCOs and which are having higher hit rate, that we have already decided to decommission. And we are really focusing on in future that carbon free resources. And we have invited expression of, in fact, we are doing also a lot of R&D work and started pilot project for carbon capture and green hydrogen, one such a project we have undertaken to synthesize methanol from carbon capture and green hydrogen. I will say that to summarize that NTPC, as far as NTPC is concerned, we have taken significant steps towards moving towards greener power and cleaner power. But as far as coal-based power station is concerned, definitely it may not be the right time that this will be decommissioned. It will take some more time to really move away from coal-based, unless otherwise the storage systems are viable solution is coming for as far as cost is concerned. And any decision to really decommission, we should seriously consider whether can we handle high renewable power as far as our grid is concerned, and mobilizing huge investment which is needed to increase this RE capacity. And at the same time, today RE is cheaper because there are a lot of concessions are given. There is no transmission charges for RE, which is being again borne by the additional cost being borne by the DISCOMs. At the same time, they are bearing the cost of flexibilization, bringing down this optimum generation level to up to the technical minimum, or maybe in near future we may have to come down below technical minimum also. So these are the things, so I think we need to really look at before we take a call. But it will all depend. As far as otherwise, we are really going towards a mix of both coal as well as green power. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mondal. Really appreciate it. Arunabha, please, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mondal, for giving the NTPC perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a company that is straddling the backbone of the electricity system, but also driving it towards a different electricity system as well. Maybe this is the right time to turn to Mr. Bhargav for your remarks. And then let me also just request the panelists who've kindly consented to join us to extend their indulgence with us for a little while longer, so that we can have a deeper panel discussion beyond the original scheduled time. And Karthik will, of course, be moderating that. Mohit, over to you.
Yeah, thanks once again, Mr. Ghosh. And first and foremost, thanks for having me. I know you wanted Mr. Gurdeep Singh, so you settled with us. So apologies for that, but I hope it doesn't. It's not actually a dampener. So Mr. Mandal has actually already put a lot of point of view which we generally share. So I'll not get into details on those point of views because we're already doing a lot of things. Yes, we have actually increased the targets on the renewable side, which is now my portfolio, as Mr. Ghosh pointed out. So it's 60 gigawatts in the next 10 years or so. More importantly, it's actually meant to be almost as large in terms of size as our coal-based portfolio is, at least in the nameplate capacity-wise. In energy terms, obviously, we all know the energy from renewables is much lower compared to coal-based plants. But as things stand today, and as probably pointed out in the reports also, the reliance on coal, it was earlier contributing almost 77%. It's actually come down significantly, and it's likely to continue in a downward trajectory. But I do agree with what Mr. Mandal said, that coal is here to stay for quite some time. And while transition is happening, as probably all of us are aware, as we see it all around us, it'll take its own time. And why? Because the major factor with RE remains the intermittency and the need to provide reliable, sustainable 24/7 power. So if I have to look at what NTPC is doing, I'll just add a little bit to what Mr. Mandal said. So 60 gigawatts by 2032 is our target. Where we are today is we are already having a pipeline of almost 4.5 gigawatts, which includes about 1.3 gigawatts, which is commissioned. Other than that, and the balance is under construction. Other than that, we have also tied up for land for about another 5 gigawatts in Gujarat. You might have read in the papers. And we are also facilitating, and this is a role we started off earlier with in terms of facilitating the RE power in the country. So we still have about close to 7 gigawatts of that part. But that will be probably a much smaller part of our overall business. And as we look at going forward, primarily on building assets and creating more RE on our own. Along with renewables, what makes sense for us, and probably this is something which is generating a lot of buzz and excitement across the world, is hydrogen. So we are focusing only on green hydrogen, and this is a kind of a debate I'm sure Mr. Ghosh have also heard, whether it's green or blue. So we have been very steadfast. We are saying for us, it's only green hydrogen because we are into green power. So we'll make green hydrogen. And with that, we're also looking at green ammonia and green methanol. In fact, we already announced 2 or 3 pilots. One, of course, you might have heard in the newspapers, is a green hydrogen-based mobility pilot in Ladakh, as well as Delhi. So we already invited bids for a hydrogen FCV-based bus. And other one is that we have started a pilot on green methanol, where we'll actually be producing green hydrogen from renewable sources and capturing carbon dioxide from our flue, and put this together to produce green methanols. So both of these things are in a very nascent stage, and the cost remains one of the biggest hurdles. But it's our sense that if we are able to actually create a good market and a good visibility for green hydrogen in the country, and which is quite possible, as Mr. Ghosh said very early on, India is among the largest electricity markets in the world. It will probably become the 3rd largest going in a few years. So we can set for ourselves a very clear roadmap and a clear target in terms of what amount of green hydrogen we need to do. It actually bring down the cost. And I don't have to look far. Renewable happened the same way. 10 years ago, renewable was at 17 rupees. Today, we are at less than 2 rupees. And incidentally, Ntpc is the company which still has the distinction of quoting the lowest tariff. That's 199 in Gujarat. So we've done that also. So we are quite hopeful we'll be able to achieve a so-called psychological barrier of, say, around $2 per kilogram or $2.5 per kilogram kind of price for hydrogen in the next 5 years. So it's our willingness and it's our hope that if we are able to bring everything together in terms of policy, which the government is already working on, this is possible. The other critical areas where we are also working on the decarbonizing side is in terms of handling waste to energy. So we are looking at solutions for converting municipal solid waste to electricity, as well as converting municipal solid waste to charcoal, which can then be fired in a boiler or in any place. It can actually replace coal. What we have seen in the pilot is that the charcoal is having almost the similar characteristics as coal. So that's another area of business for us. The third area of business, which we'll continue to focus on, we'll try to build on actually, is zero carbon based mobility. And I've actually deliberately not used e-mobility because now we are looking at battery based as well as green hydrogen based. So it's actually zero carbon based mobility. The other pillar which Mr. Mandal touched upon was in terms of environment compliance. So when we look at what we are doing in terms of transitioning, is focus on renewables, focus on waste to energy solutions, focus on zero carbon mobility, focus on energy efficiency, and which is where our focus is in the last maybe 5 to 8 years. We've actually developed only supercritical and ultra supercritical power plants. And this is where I wanted to say that I actually fundamentally differ from the premise put out in the report. Age is just a number. And we have been telling this for quite some time. Mr. Mandal mentioned it. Age does not mean the plant is inefficient. And Singrauli, Korba, Ramagundam, Farakka are testimony. All of these plants have efficiency much higher than whatever you're talking about in a report. What we had in fact proposed to the CA was, let's look at decommissioning of power plants which have a heat rate higher than, for example, 2600 or 2500. Let's do an analysis of how much energy is required. And if we feel that a power plant having a heat rate of 2600 or lower, which means it's more efficient, should only be allowed to run. Why do you allow a power plant having 3000, 2900, 3100, 3200 and all those kind of things? So what we have done, as Mr. Mandal mentioned, we have already shut down Talcher. This was the oldest plant in our fleet. This was actually taken over from Orissa, 60 years old. We have shut it down on the 31st of March. Going forward, we'll also take out plants which are having any efficiency level above 2500, 2600. So that is where the threshold needs to be. Let's not talk about age, because when we did the plants 30 years ago, when we did Singrauli, we had at least the people who built Ntpc had the foresight to actually go for plants which are efficient and which will last for the next 30, 40 years. So they are good to go for the country. And I'm sure once we reach a level where we have better alternative sources, we can do. So that's one. The other session which we have been having on the environment compliance side is, and probably this slightly distinct from the decommissioning discussion is, in Ntpc, probably, we have the FGD thing going on at almost 64 gigawatt worth of plants. So we have been suggesting the government needs to give a first run status to the plants who have actually met the environment compliance requirements in the thermal sector. Because what is happening, we have been finding that while Ntpc was like a good, law-abiding citizen, we took all the thing together, we started investing. A lot of other people have actually not bothered to put money on this side. So we need to ensure that environment compliance remains it remains the bedrock on which our requirements of energy are met. So first run and efficiency level of say 2600, 2500, we are fine. We are fine. I mean, we know our plants are operating much better than that. Mr. Mandal did point out there's an issue of how to actually measure. I'm sure with guys like you working, preparing the policy documents, we can work out a system which can actually make that happen. So if you look at the decarbonization pathway for India, so I'm not saying this is the final word, but it can be focused on renewable, goes without saying. We have a target of 450 gigawatts. We need to do it, but we need to also ensure that we're able to integrate them in the grid. So the grid is smooth and stable. And this is where I'll be happy to hear what Dr. Baba has to say, because POSOCO has this, very efficient and important task of actually ensuring that all this power, the grid operates smoothly and all this renewable integration happens smoothly. It's also important to keep on focusing on efficiency in the use of energy. And this is something I believe, I'm sure your agency is doing. IEA has come out recently also with another report which says energy efficiency should not be given a back role once you're talking about renewable energy only. So that's as important, and that goes beyond electricity production. It has to be in the use of energy. The third part, of course, is everyone's needs need to be met in an affordable and reliable manner. So this is the baseline as far as India is concerned, and I think this is a baseline as far as any country is concerned. And lastly, this is something which probably was touched upon partly in your report. Transition should be just and sustainable for all stakeholders, and this is something we have been putting out. The number of jobs in the coal mining sector, how do we ensure that the jobs are not lost and people who are actually losing those jobs are reskilled or prepared for new jobs, not necessarily in the renewable sector, because the renewable sector probably does not require that number of jobs, but we need to find jobs for them. So we cannot have a transition which actually creates joblessness. So these are a few things I just wanted to touch upon. So if I just have to leave with last one line, coal will remain. A number is something which probably you guys do better, when you do all these numbers and number crunching and saying, so it will remain 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it will remain. But transition is already there, and we need to focus and ensure that the transition happens. All the new capacity which we today talk about, we should actually be talking about renewables. That is something which we believe very strongly in. So as Mr. Mandal also pointed out, we have taken a call, we won't be doing any new greenfield projects. So that's how we need to take it forward. So all our incremental capacity will most probably be all renewables. And that is something. So I'll probably stop here. And if you think I need to be there for the panel discussion, I'll be happy to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhargav, for highlighting several issues, especially closing off with the issue of, there is a transition that's already underway, and yet coal will remain central for quite some time. But then the issues of the just transition, not forgetting energy efficiency, not forgetting that age is just a number. And I want to assure you that that's also the way it is just one of the variables, as Weber presented. It would be a very crude approach to simply say, someone old, a plant that's old needs to be shut down. So that's why we've taken a more granular approach. But the points that you have made are certainly very well taken. And I want to also just take this opportunity to thank Ntpc for the leadership it is showing on green hydrogen, which could be one of those critical fuels of the future. So I will now hand it over to Karthik Ganeshan, who's the Director for Research Coordination at CEEW and leads a lot of our power sector air quality work, to moderate this panel. But I also hope, Mr. Bhargav, that you'll stay on the panel because your thoughts will continue to be extremely valuable.
Great. Thank you so much, Arunava, for that. And thank you, Mr. Bhargav, Mr. Mondal, and everyone else in Weber for that presentation. So first off, just to start, as when I was graduating from college in 2006, that's when the IPO happened, Ntpc. Until then, it was a public company, and I was Ntpc is one of the first companies into which I took equity into, and I was very proud of it at that time. Not that I'm not today, but it is so it's not like we want Ntpc as a organization to sort of come down, and we're not targeting Ntpc here. But of course, as the largest player, I think it's important that we establish transparently. And I think talking about transparency, and I think you mentioned something, Mr. Bhargav, which is that many of these Ntpc stations are very efficient, right? Which is, and my colleague Vaibhav also alluded to it, which is that we find that some of this data pertaining to this plant performance is not necessarily available in the public domain. We understand, of course, Ntpc being a listed company, there are some elements that may not be necessarily be there, but as a regulated entity, perhaps there is a better need for some of these data points to be more transparent, because at the end of the day, it's an energy balance problem. If so much coal is going in, and if Coal India is basically getting paid for so many kilocalories worth of energy they're putting into the system, it has to come out somewhere, right? So if the plant is claiming an efficiency which is higher than what is being evaluated, clearly there's either a fault in the methodology, right, or this perennial problem of of Ntpc CIL, the standoff, right, which is coal quality is basically missing, right, still continues despite having a third party arbitration there. In fact, we had an extensive debate with some of your Ntpc colleagues. I realized that former Ntpc colleagues are very, very vehement supporters of Ntpc, and they were we were discussing this particular aspect of of this plant. I think it was Singrauli, right, the 100 percentage. And I think what we established was Singrauli was actually operating at 2800, right? Whereas, my conversation with Ntpc colleagues suggests that internal computations say it's 2400, right? Now, again, as I said, in fact, my colleague has just shared the link to the data set as well as the report. We would urge everyone here to basically explore this. We put out transparently how we've computed station heat rate, variable cost, fixed cost, every one of it. And if at the end of it, we find out that, some of these things actually are different between what is available in the public and what's in the private domain, I think we definitely need to stand corrected. So, but that said, let me just place it. I mean, I place my gratitude, first of all, to everyone here for giving us your time so generously. Thank you, Ms. Chandra, Mr. Baba, Pradeep, as well as Rohit. So let's get into the discussion. And I'll probably start first with Mr. Baba. I think Mr. Mohit is also looking to hear your views on where the system is likely to be. Mr. Baba, one of the things we see, right, is when you look at these studies that have come out, from eminent agencies through which POSOCO is also partnered. For instance, the 2022 study, right, with NREL. Right, we find that everything is driven by this target that Government of India set, which is 175 gigawatt worth of capacity, right, of RE and everything else. So we would love for to understand, where is POSOCO see, for instance, right, the need for slack in the way the coal capacity is currently there. Everybody's been talking about surpluses for more than 5-6 years now, right? But we've never seen an assessment of what is the real amount of coal capacity the Indian system needs. Every time we say there's surplus, I've seen arguments being floated saying either there's no coal available, or there's no transmission system capacity available, or plant is down, right? So if you're actually building a coal-fired power plant to be a base load type system, it has to be available 85% of the time. If it is not, it's not really worth its weight in salt, right? So what is your sense? And is POSOCO looking to commission a study? Because I think it'll answer a lot of questions that Mr. Mondal and Mr. Bhargava have also put out, saying that we need to assess this. Tough question, but over to you, Mr. Bhargava.
No, I mean, thank you, Karthik and the CEEW for making me the panel member for important topic. See, for a system operator, we always don't see so far the way you are trying what should be the coal fleet, or what should be the it is definitely a planner's domain. planning for next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. It is basically the resource optimal mix planning. What the system operator doesn't have any, opportunity basically, or we have to live with what is made available to me for tomorrow or for maximum a month ahead. So so first of all, it would be very difficult for us to say what should be. But yes, as an operator, the role of system operator is whatever is available, make it available at economic, affordable, and efficient. These are the three parameters where the earlier system operator have been operating. Now the advent of renewables, we have added one more parameter is the flexibility. So the point is, we have to operate under these four things. It should be economical, it should be affordable, it should be efficient and flexible. So and one more important thing, as an operator, we can't define our demand. The demand should be like, load should be like this. The demand is English word, the next demand, that is why I change it to load. So that load cannot be controlled by us. So we have to, once you have given powers of, you have made the electricity the infrastructure, first of all, to the infrastructure. So therefore, it has to be made available the way it is, as the consumer expects. We need to maintain quality of power and continuity of power. So that is why it is difficult for us to define what should be. But yes, the issue is a plant. Which plant will give you the most economic way of meeting the load curve? That's the point. So given this opportunity, India, and one more thing what is to be told is the demand, if you say 60% is the minimum or 70% and goes to the peak 100%, whether it is any season, whether it is winter, rainy, summer, this demand variation will always be there. So 60% is always there. So therefore, we have to see how economically to meet that 60% of the demand economically is the important point. So when we do not have so much of nuclear, when we don't have so many hydro plants, we can cater to the 60% of the base demand. We have to fall on the shoulders of thermal. So that is what we have to see. Next 10 years or 15 years, yes, we have to demand projection or estimate. We have to do what is right and what is affordable and what is economic. We have to see. As a system operator, I will only see these are the four things which we have to see.
Sure. So a quick follow-up question. So when India, of course, our when Mr. Piyush Goyal came in, became the minister 2014, around that time, one nation, one grid sort of became a big concept, and I think we achieved it also because the southern grid got integrated. But do you think today India is truly one nation, one grid in the way that there is not that much constraint in the way power can move across the country? And my rephrasing the earlier question really was this, right? I understand, as a planner, as an operator rather, right? Your role is not to plan, but I think as the custodian of, for instance, a lot of the data pertaining to the way the system performs, right? The only people really, to me, right, who are able to actually do the assessment of can we do without, for instance, plant A, B, or C, right? I think POSOCO is the only agency that seems to have the capacity and the ability to do, and of course the data, I don't have to say this, we've had discussions on this multiple times. As long as the data is not made available to the research community, right? I don't think we'll be able to help or provide an unbiased or a transparent perspective of whether indeed such a system is operable. So do you feel, for instance, today the system can perform without a range of some of these older assets, or are they critical to the system stability itself?
See, first of all, I would say there is no doubt or ambiguity on one grid, one nation. Definitely. power is able to exchange one region to another region or one state to other state. But what is the basic issue is that operating the grid, everybody have to play their role for a stable, secure grid. If I am in the four road crossing, everybody have to follow certain discipline. Otherwise, the commotion is there, congestion will come. So what is the, also as such now we do not have any congestion, but where sometimes you find is that occasionally is if somebody wants to shut down their entire plants and try to get everything from outside, there the issue comes, has he planned his intrastate system accordingly is the point. Whether he has done 5 years ahead or 3 years ahead or some adequate planning has each state has done, that you have to ensure. So the intrastate systems play a major role for or make it more successful for the one grid, one nation, one grid. Right. So I would say that there is a lot to, of course, we have graduated from intermediate level to we have graduation, we have come. Yeah, we have to become a postgraduate, we have to do little more introspection. A lot of core systems and processes have to be built in.
Sure, great.
I think to be short answer.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Baba. So I think that brings out a very useful point. In fact, I'll move to Ms. Anjali Chandra. Ms. Chandra, you were of course at the CEA for many years, so you were donning the role that Mr. Baba is alluding to, as the planner. So you have a view of what the system decided to do, building out the capacity. But right now, you're of course at Punjab state regulator, and you've seen the crisis that the state is currently went through at least the last few weeks until the rains came, and it saved, I guess, a bit. And I think it speaks exactly to the problem that he alluded to, which is, when one of your newer units went off, right, you couldn't, I guess, draw more than a certain amount of power from the outside, right? And unfortunately, right, even our own decommissioning argument falls flat because you started relying on some of your older inefficient assets, despite the fact that, you had efficient assets that could have been planned and made available to that system. So where do you think, the state of Punjab, as a regulator, where you see it, right, how did they sort of get it wrong, at least, in this system? And, what do you see as sort of main challenges that you see to graduating towards, more efficient generation, Ms. Chandra? Ma'am, you're on mute. You're on mute, ma'am. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to CEEW for inviting me to share my thoughts. Yes, Punjab faced a crisis in the recent past because, 3 of our units, the efficient units, were down. One went off in March, then the second of the same company went off, and then the third also unit went off. And our available transmission capacity on the interstate was in the range of 6,500 to 6,800 megawatt. And it was increased to 7,500 megawatt. But the capacity of the units which were down was around 2,000 megawatt. So, when we buy from outside, it is limited by the ATC capacity of the transmission lines. Secondly, it is limited by the intrastate transmission system, as mentioned by Mr. Baba, that you have to strengthen your 400 kV system, which is in the process of being strengthened. So we cannot take more than that power into our system from the interstate lines. So that we have to upgrade our ICTs on the 400 kV system. So that is a constraint. And we had to rely on other plants. So, decommissioning of all the plants in the state which are less efficient would not be a very viable solution. One is that the transmission system inside the state would not be able to take it. We will be drawing power from some other side, whereas the transmission system is on the other side. So we have decommissioned Guru Nanak Dev thermal plant, where 4 units have been decommissioned. And we have also decommissioned 2 units of less efficient Ropar thermal plant. But there are times like what happened in the past, that there are forced outages, units are under maintenance. So complete decommissioning of less efficient units may not be the solution till, we would not like to put in new capacity or new efficient capacity and decommission the existing capacity, of which we have almost paid the fixed costs. There are so many units, even outside and interstate, where Punjab would have paid the fixed costs. So if those were to be decommissioned, then we would, lose that opportunity of getting cheap power. The variable cost may be higher, but actually the total cost is low because the fixed cost has become zero, almost zero.
Right.
Or less. So from a regulator's point of view, the tariffs to the consumers are high, and we have to balance the interests of all these stakeholders and of the environment also. We are very conscious of that fact. We have already, like I said, decommissioned Bhatinda and Ropar thermal power plants, which are less efficient. But, ramping up and ramping down is also important. Flexibility, when more of renewable comes in, we have to have flexible generation. And, when we have flexible generation, the flexibility in our system is quite through thermal plants. Like CERC has already said a technical minimum of 55%. But when you go down in thermal plants and ramp up or ramp down, the station heat rate goes up. Actually, the costs go up. And we, in the CA optimal capacity mix, I was seeing that they have also taken scenarios where you can go down up to 40% of the.
Sure.
But in that scenario, the costs are definitely going to go up. The station heat rate, the auxiliary consumption, the oil consumption, that all goes up. So, it is like balancing on a fulcrum where one side the costs go up when you have flexible generation, and on the other side renewables are going up. So you have to have both.
Sure. I just want to sort of place here, since you've brought up the point of fixed cost payments. I think fixed cost needs to be set aside because that we have to incur anyway, right? Fixed cost we have to incur anyway.
We have already incurred that. What I'm saying is, if we have a plant,
sure,
with a plant where we have already paid the fixed cost over 25 years and we are getting it only on variable costs.
Sure.
So even if it is a bit less efficient, maybe as a regulator, we wouldn't like to lose that low cost power.
Right. At the same time,
in the entire nation or maybe in the world, yes, emissions are to be brought down. But then, if that can be funded, we would.
Correct. We certainly will get to that. We'll get to the funding part. Part. So I just have a follow-up question for you, Ms. Chandra, which is, of course, you look at, of course, power procurement plans, but you also look at approval of, payments to GENCOs, right? The state GENCO also comes to you, right? Yes. So while you don't have a view of, NTPC plants because they go to CERC, right? You have a view of, state GENCOs coming to you. Yeah. Why isn't, efficiency sort of a metric, and why aren't plants able to actually keep to like a tight efficiency bound, right? Why are we sort of really allowing plants of, such low heat rates to, perform, and, why are we continuously kind of compensating them for these low heat rates? Over time, I'm sure, that process has just become very lax. So why does that happen? Because if you look at the way CERC state, current regulations or any of the states, right, we've really just let the leash loose on that, right? So pretty much everything is just passed through. So why do you think that's happening?
No, it is not passed through. I think, what we do is we give them as per norms. Even if they achieve a higher station heat rate or higher auxiliary consumption, we limit them to the norms. But, with this part loading, maybe it is because renewables have come in because more of capacity has been built, that, they go into part loading or lower PLFs. When you have lower PLFs, naturally your station heat rate goes up, your auxiliary consumption goes up. But let me assure you that it is only as per norms that we allow the heat rate to be passed through or the auxiliary consumption or the other parameters to be passed through. It is not that even if they have higher parameters, it is that, yes, less efficient plants are there, but they also have norms.
Right.
So we don't allow them above the norms.
Right.
That it has been lax on the norms.
Sure.
Themselves are higher, I agree, because they are less efficient. Yes. But beyond the norms, they are not passed.
Okay. So I'll quickly, sort of, move focus to the state of Rajasthan. Rohit, I know you've taken on the role of MD RUVNL only earlier this year, but one of the things that we've seen about the state of Rajasthan is, right from Rohit, are you with us? Sorry, I'm not able to see your video, so I just want to ensure that you're there before I pose the question to you.
Yeah, I'm here. Do you mind if I keep my video?
Absolutely, not a problem. If your bandwidth is a problem, yeah, please. Yeah. Sure. So as I was saying, so Rajasthan. Sure. Please, Rohit. Yeah. I understand. I was just checking to see whether you were there. That's it. Yeah. So I was going to say that Rajasthan is one of those states, right, which seems to have sort of taken to this view that, some of the assets that we invested in, right, didn't really work out for us. I know there were active efforts to, for instance, I think offload Chabra power plant to Ntpc. I know that sort of, got scuttled for various reasons. And I know, you guys have pretty much mothballed some of the thermal assets that you've created, right? I mean, it's a strange fact that, that sitting so far away from coal assets, Rajasthan invested so much resources in even building some of them. But be that as it may, it happened, and you guys built it. And now, of course, you're sort of thinking, in two ways about it. So what is Rajasthan's perspective when it comes to, easing on costs and, and sort of transitioning away to a lower cost system, really? Forget, even efficiency or renewables or anything like that. So what is the path that you see ahead for Rajasthan, Rohit?
Yeah, thanks, Karthik, for that excellent question. Yeah, you're right. As an organization which is mandated to supply quality power at a cheaper rate, apart from, of course, the other externalities, both positive and negative, which the coal plants bring, the focus right now, the points on which on the economics of it. There are three important developments which have happened in the past. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So I think there are three important developments which have happened in the past, which are shaping this trajectory of the one is fall in the cost of renewable energy power, and Rajasthan being a state where a lot of resources of renewable energies are there. So we, of course, have been pioneer in that. But I think apart from this factor created this dilemma. One is the load profile of the state, and which other speakers have also obliquely pointed out that when you have a load profile, for example, in Rajasthan, where the peak power is about, last year, the peak power is about 15,000 megawatt. The lower end was about 6,000 to 7,000 megawatts. So there is a huge variation of demand in a single day. This fact.
Rohit, I think you're facing some sort of, there's a bit of a gap in the way when you speak. There's some gaps in between. Sorry, is it possible to switch to an alternative network at all, Rohit? I'm not sure whether everybody else is sensing it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'll do that. Give me a second.
Sure. We'll just quickly, sort of. So just to sort of, as Rohit is maybe setting up his, internet, one of the things that I wanted to sort of just, reiterate is, one of the findings that we basically have is that if you were to consider, and I know age is not a category, but what we found is that age definitely corresponds very well with thermal efficiency, right? So ultimately, we're not suggesting that we decommission purely based on age, right? There are some older plants that we still do actually retain in this, but what we're actually saying is, older plants, as much as we say they've been paid through for fixed costs, right? They have a significant O&M, fixed O&M that still needs to be paid for, right? And what Vaibhav's study really found was that this fixed O&M savings alone can actually pay for the debt and the equity that these plants will have to be paid if you were to decommission them early. So technically, they can be decommissioned at almost no cost, right? Is the main conclusion that we're having. And on top of that, what we're saying is that there can be money on the table to actually help do the kind of investment that, Mr. Baba is talking about in the state transmission and what Mr. Anjali Chandra also referred to. But it's just that, at the end of the day, that money is actually at the high level, at the country level. How will somebody, sort of translate that, savings at the national level to the state level is really an important question. And I think, even as we get into MBED and all of that, those discussions will have to come in. So that's really the, the main crux of what we were looking to say. Rohit, maybe now over to you again. Sorry to make the points that you were. Just wanted to sort of, yeah. Are you back?
Hello.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it better?
Is much better, much better. You were saying that there is this big difference in load between summer and winter in Rajasthan. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm saying that because of that, this factor works both ways. This is providing us this cheaper power. And a firm power. I think I can see your reaction, so that's why.
It's still a bit coming in and out. Is anybody else who can speak up? Can you say whether you're able to hear Rohit clearly, please? I just want to ensure it's not an issue just on my side. Pradeep, are you able to hear him fully?
I could hear him, but I have the same observation. I think there's a bit of, his voice comes up and down. And
up and down. Sorry about this, Rohit. Maybe, we'll give you some time. Why don't you sort of try and see whether you can fix it and come back, Rohit? Would that be possible at all? Is there an alternative option to you?
I think give me 5 minutes before
Sure. Of course. Please. Yeah. Thank you so much for considering. Really appreciate it. Sure. Yeah, we will do that. We will do that. Yeah. Apologies, I didn't actually introduce some of our speakers, but I think in the way I introduced them, it was probably clear. Ms. Anjali Chandra, of course, is currently member at PSERC. Rohit Gupta is currently MD, RUVNL, which is basically the trading entity that buys power for the state of Rajasthan and is tasked with, of course, reducing their overall cost of power procurement, given that, they have long-term PPAs as well as, relying on the market for power that they consume. And as I said, we wanted to tap into their knowledge base in terms of, what their experience was, in trying to offload some of these expensive assets that they had built up. But, given that Rohit is sort of, going to join back in, let me move on to Dr. Pradeep Pereira. Pradeep, I know, you represent a multilateral agency, which has broader, global goals, of driving energy transition. So you're obviously the most progressive voice in this discussion. So which is perfectly fine because we have more considerations of, security, costs, that I think every other speaker here has to address. But notwithstanding that, right, Pradeep, what exactly is the opportunity, right? I think, Ms. Chandra sort of alluded to it, right? Who is going to sort of really help, fund this transition, and what's the discussion that's actually happening out there? We saw some numbers that, my colleague put out, which is, a certain, I think he said we're looking at about 32,000 crore roughly, I think is basically what it'll take to pay off some of these older assets, even the debt and the equity, right? So how can the money for this really be raised, and what's the thinking globally in order to help countries like India and states like, Punjab and Rajasthan really, even achieve that? Where's the money there right now for that, Pradeep? If you can walk us through it.
Yeah, I think, Karthik, thank you very much for inviting me for this panel discussion. I also had the opportunity of reviewing your publication at the time of its preparation. So I would like to congratulate you for coming up with this study, where you have done a kind of a first order estimation of what kind of savings can be achieved if the thermal power plants in India are dispatched according to their thermal efficiency. I think that gives a very good insights to everybody regarding what kind of cost savings can be achieved. I think there are certain limitations in the modeling that you did. I think it can be done in a more granular manner. You can increase the accuracy of the estimate, but at the end of the day, it depends on how you dispatch it in the real life. I think as mentioned by our colleague from POSOCO, I mean, the real-time dispatch is what matters, I think, not what we estimate. But I think as a first-order approximation, I think we could see there can be real savings both in terms of financial terms as well as in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, if all the power plants are dispatched according to their thermal efficiency. Now, at the moment, I understand in India, the dispatching is done at the state level. and then only the interstate plants are dispatched at some national level. But there can be, one can say that it's a suboptimal way of power plant dispatching. If you take the total resources available in the country under this one country, one frequency framework, and do the dispatching to optimize or to minimize the total cost of generation, variable cost of generation, we would be able to identify what are the power plants that are likely to be underutilized in such a scenario. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. We're just starting off.
So I think under that kind of a scenario, you can estimate what are the plants that could be underutilized, and if you do it in a dynamic manner, we would understand what are the plants that we might have to keep as reserve assets, and what are the plants that are redundant. I think once we have done that kind of analysis, we would identify what are the plants that are candidates for decommissioning. As you mentioned, I think most of these plants are likely to be relatively older plants, which are more than 25 years old, as well as the plants which are fully depreciated. So the issue of capital recovery doesn't really arise, I think, because the debt would have been already paid off, and the equity investors would have earned their equity return on these plants.
No, there is still a substantial amount, by the way, right? There is still about
substantial amount of, I mean, some cases I think it may be fully recovered.
Right.
If it's more than 25 years old, because these plants have a design life of around 25 to 30 years. Now, in that scenario, I think the cost savings that can be achieved through this dispatch optimization can pay for this conversion. The question is the other stakeholders who would lose out. The workers, I think, would be one area that need to be looked into, and the wider community that depend on the coal economy. Because coal power plant is not just a coal power plant. I think it involves a lot of linkages to the rest of the economy through the coal mining, coal transportation, and all the other associated cost. I think the international community is aware of this issue, and they came up with this concept called just transition. That is to basically to finance the cost of transition from coal into more cleaner forms of energy. I also believe and I agree that coal still has a role to play, but we have to basically improve the efficiency of coal utilization. So, for instance, when you have ultra supercritical power plants in India which are underutilized, and when we continue to use older coal power plants which are not that efficient at the expense of more efficient coal power plants, that is not the way that the Indian power system should operate. Sure. I mean, that is inefficient from the point of view of finance or economics, and it is also inefficient from the point of view of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that's where I think this debate need to be carried out.
Right.
And if I understand there are political economy issues because some of these assets are held at the state level, some are at the owned by the private sector, and this need kind of a rethinking, I think, as recommended in your study. Yeah, I think the wider question, I think, is if these coal power plants can be identified, and if they can, what are the plants that are to be decommissioned, which are going to be underutilized, then I think there can be ways and means of utilizing the transmission connectivity, because some of these plants are, not all these plants have a transmission connectivity. So that can be utilized if the land is available to have some renewable plants, some storage plants, and also some of these coal power plants can be used as synchronous condensers to provide the reactive power. So by doing that, you can recover at least part of the cost involved. Now, I think the other issue is when you sort of extrapolate from that, you would have certain amount of coal savings, and then you will need to look into coal mining closure at one point or the other. At that point, I think there are more sort of a socio-economic cost involved, because a larger number of people are employed in the mining industry, and there are more stronger linkages with the community, the mining industry. Again, I think
is there a dedicated effort, Pradeep, on part of ADB or the World Bank or other institutions to sort of really try and help countries like India sort of try and make this transition? I hear that there is a program underway. If you can sort of shed some light on that.
Yeah, basically, I think the G7, I think the recent G7 meeting, they allocated something around $2 billion for a fund to facilitate this coal transition. I mean, $2 billion doesn't mean much, I think, for a country like India. Correct. Because, I mean, this 2 billion is not entirely for India.
Of course.
Out of this 2 billion, I think 1.5 billion is going to be allocated for a separate fund called Accelerated Coal Transition. They came up with a very appropriate acronym called ACT.
Right.
So this ACT is going to be announced, I think, in the COP26, and the countries can submit proposals to access the funding under this. So they have to prepare some kind of a roadmap for coal transition. I mean, it can be a pilot because I think for a country like India, I think we're talking about 20-25 gigawatts of coal capacity to be redundant. So I think I don't think 1.5 billion, no, even maybe assuming that about 1/3 or 1/4 of that is to be allocated to India, that would be not adequate. But at least to set up a pilot project and to demonstrate how this can be done, I think that would be that kind of money can be utilized, and it can also be utilized for, as I was telling, the issues related to coal mining, especially the socio-economic and environmental issues. So when you close down a coal mine, I think the reskilling and retraining of the workers, the general livelihood support to the wider community, and the restoration of the environment. I mean, most of these mining areas are degraded areas. So for those kind of activities, this money can be used.
Right. Not necessarily for paying out the equity or the debt. Right.
Not necessarily. I think I would think that if you do it in a methodical manner, most of the plants that would be identified as redundant would have already been paid off.
Right.
I mean, as you were saying, I think O&M cost saving alone would be sufficient to pay off some of the equity.
Exactly.
If it has not been fully recovered.
Exactly. Right.
Basically, I don't think debt would be an issue because I mean, when we are talking about 25-year-old plant, I mean, it should not have a debt in its balance sheet.
Sure. We roughly are seeing about $5 billion worth of debt plus equity still in some of these assets, by the way. So even to take them out, $5 billion worth of debt plus equity is still there. And then of course, and I think there's also includes the workforce, if I'm correct, 21 plus 11,000, so 11,000. So I think there's about $3 billion worth of debt and $1.2 billion worth of workforce related payments. That brings us to about $4 billion for really even $4 to $5 billion just to even decommission the older assets. So clearly, not enough funding available in that pool. But very quickly, since we have,
I mean, this is an initial commitment. I mean, I don't know whether it would get increased. Other thing is that I think there are certain models that have been proposed. I think one would be if a coal power plant can be replaced with a renewable plant, or let's say, and with a lower power purchase price.
Right.
The difference in the cost. Let's say the coal power plant has a variable cost of generation of 5 rupees, and if it can be replaced with a renewable plant with the storage with, let's say, 350 rupees, and that 150 difference can be securitized, and it can be used to pay off some of these expenses.
Sure. I think, of course, I think that's still a little further away primarily because the renewable plus storage has not yet come down to the levels you're talking about here. So maybe eventually that might be useful. Great. I'll just quickly sort of run back to Rohit. Rohit, thank you so much for, getting back on a different connection. I'm sure this must have been a hassle. We can probably switch off our videos, Rohit, if it will help you, maintain connectivity.
I think it should be fine. I'm on my mobile now. So
Okay, great. So mobile phones in the bad, right? So Rohit, so the question that we had posed to you really was, Rajasthan, I know, is actively trying to reduce its power procurement costs. And I know you mentioned, some sort of nuances about the way power demand in Rajasthan makes this necessary for you to sort of look beyond the assets that you've contracted. What is the state trying to do to sort of really reduce its exposure, right, in the medium to long term, right? I think, selling assets was something that, that I briefly mentioned to you as a question. What is the current plan right now to sort of see how your state can meet its demand while at the same time trying to sort of, really, see whether these assets will have a longer life for the state's needs?
So sorry for the network problem earlier. So as I was saying that when we look at the long-term planning for the state, there are three developments which have happened in the past, which have sort of changed the trajectory. And the first is the fall in RE prices, and that, of course, Rajasthan is a major beneficiary of that, being well suited for the kind of resources which are coming up. The last bid of solar touched about 2 rupees. But I think other than that, there are two other things which have happened simultaneously. One is the load profile, and that is important for the long-term planning, because when on the same day you have a load which is touching 15,000 megawatt, and then there's the load which goes back to 8,000 megawatt, then that requires a very different kind of planning if in another scenario where the load is consistent. And then this factor, we have been grappling with the situation now, and how should we plan for it, because as we see this kind of variation is continuing, is likely to persist because of the agricultural the farming pattern of the state, especially in the winter season. And this works both ways. On the one hand, the peak power is at a time when we don't have enough RE in the grid. So definitely this factor works against RE, and adding more and more RE into the grid to meet the peak demand would only create redundancy. So that's where we need some other source. But it also works against the coal plants, because just to run a coal plant for a short duration of time and then pay for the capacity charge for all the idle time, it doesn't make any sense. And that's where the third development comes in, and that's the evolution of markets. That's where the exchanges and our reliance on market has increased. While we were just procuring less than 1% of our power demand year before last year, we sort of touched 4%. And if you include the other short-term power which is being purchased either through bidding or through banking, then this demand, then this particular factor is becoming more and more important. So I think that for the long-term planning, what is important is that how the market for this peak demand, and I see this market becoming more and more mature, not just in exchange, but even otherwise. SECI is now floating tenders to meet the peak demand. So how this thing evolves in future, that would be important for the fate of coal plants, if I can say so. And as far as utilizing the assets of the existing assets is concerned, as have been mentioned earlier, if you do the cost benefit analysis, then the decommissioning of a coal plant makes sense only if the benefits are most than the cost. And the benefits, as have been highlighted earlier, are the payment of the capacity charges or the fall in power prices as the more efficient plants get better utilized. And I think which a factor which I don't know whether the study which was mentioned earlier are included or not, is that many of these old plants, they are part of a composite unit. So in a MOD, what happens is that if there is an older unit which is inefficient, which has high variable cost, it actually increases the variable cost of the whole project, and it brings it down in the dispatch order. So if you have these inefficient and the older units especially out of the system, then there could be a better utilization of the efficient units within the same project. Yeah.
Right. So very quickly, I mean, is Rajasthan, for instance, I mean, I remember, in fact, Rajasthan is one of those states that we saw in the assessment. You can take a look at the data sheets and the details of the report. We found that a lot of plants that were actually younger than 25, which is which we say still economic life is there, still perform very poorly on thermal efficiency, primarily because you're operating them the way that you talked about, right? So thermal efficiency also takes a hit, and they are super expensive because you're hauling coal from all the way. So would Rajasthan as a state be open to, for instance, maybe, pre-closure, or, is that something that the state has not discussed at all? If the financial support and if the mechanisms were to be sort of, developed, would Rajasthan state even be considering that? Or is that something that you've not really thought through, whether you want to sort of offload these assets?
Yeah, no, I think this is an option which needs much more thought process, and we haven't really thought through it. And also, I think a lot will depend on how the MBED scheme works out, and many of these assets probably could be better utilized if we have MBED in place. But of course, there are concerns as well as,
of course,
clarifications required there as well. Yeah.
Of course. Right. So, we are well past, the time that we wanted to conclude. So I just want to sort of go for one final round of comments with our speakers who've been so patient with us. Mr. Mohit, I know you sort of started off, initially. So after having heard from all of the different participants, I hope you've managed to sort of take away some sort of, points from there. Closing comments in terms of where do you see, so, I know MBD is coming through, right? And I know Ntpc, of course, is going to be the lead participant in the first phase, where I think the Ntpc plants are going to be sort of tried through this. And I'm hoping that, a lot more transparency develops. So what is your sort of takeaway for what MBD will sort of give us in terms of that cheaper, efficient fleet?
Yeah, thanks, Karthik. I think MBD, the proposal is from the Government of India, and I believe the final sanction would need to come from the regulator. You see, one of the problems which we find, which is still there in SCD, and first of all, of course, I'd like to compliment Mr. Baba for actually rolling out SCD. But the flaw which remains in SCD is that it's only Ntpc and the central generating stations. So we're actually not able to get the benefit of the entire fleet of 190 gigawatt. That would have actually translated into a much higher number in terms of benefit to the states. Similarly, if MBD is only rolled out for Ntpc stations, again, it's a suboptimal exercise. So while we are okay with that, in fact, we have always been saying that we need to optimize generation so that the benefit of the cheaper power stations is actually passed on, because earlier what we used to see, that in many cases, our Singrauli would not get full dispatch and some high cost station would actually be getting dispatched, much to the irritation of the buyer as well. So we feel that SCD, the actually implementation of the technical minimum on a uniform basis. Today, I think I heard Ms. Anjali Chandra speak about 55%, but there are many states in the country who have actually still stuck at 70% technical minimum. So we are again actually seeing a suboptimal situation in terms of the benefits being accruing to the state. So if we need to do this, our request would be that we do it across the board, so that the entire benefit, and I'm sure the computing power available with Bosoko will be able to take care of these kind of things very, very easily and in a very, very smooth manner. So we have MBD, or let me say we already have SCD, we have the RTM. So a lot of benefit is already actually passing on to the states. And I heard Rajasthan also saying that they are now actually getting a lot of power from the exchange. So if all these things accrue, then ultimately the states are going to benefit, because it's not anybody's game plan to actually load the burden the states with higher cost. And which is why I think a question you asked Rajasthan and Punjab also, and maybe I'll take a stab at it. When we say that so much capacity was added, late 2000s and early 2010s, why did all the states actually get into setting up plants in their own state? And why the hell did the banks support that? So half the problem of this is that banks supported plants, which on day one, everyone knew may not be feasible. So this problem, everyone, and all of us sitting here know this problem. The people in the banks who actually funded them know the problem. So this is the problem there. We never bothered to actually set up plants which are the most economic. So half an analysis would not be required if you would have said that we have new plants coming up close to the power stations which are more economic in terms of using coal and so on and so forth. So this is a problem. Sometimes there's a gap between what we want and what someone else wants. So this could be resolved, I'm sure. MBD is probably a step forward, but more important than probably generators, it is the states who need to come on board for MBD to actually be successful.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bhargava. Thank you for those comments. So, on SCED, the point you made, I felt that it was a bit of a taking from one hand and putting it in the other. right? We looked at the SCED outcomes, Mr. Baba, early on, and we used to see, that some of course, Ntpc's newer, spanking new plants would obviously go down the schedule, and all of it would obviously be, given to some of their, cheaper plants. So I'm not necessarily sure whether it, gave us a cleaner generation mix, but of course it allowed for, Singrauli and Rihand and all of those to really benefit at the cost of, Kudgi or, maybe one of these other plants, which obviously is much more expensive. So I'm not sure whether, of course there was a financial benefit that was there, but I think right from the outset, our assessment was that SCD did not necessarily clean up the mix. But I think we did definitely see that financially it did make better sense for many utilities and then definitely for NTPC. Mr. Baba, yes, Mr.
So Karthik, if I may,
Please.
So I do agree. The objective of SCD was one, to optimize generation.
Yeah.
The issue of efficiency, which you have partly raised and which I also commented upon, is a construct we need to bring in.
Yeah,
it's not there. It's neither there in SCD nor in MBED. So that's something we need to bring in, which is why I said, let's focus on efficiency. Let's focus on first run, because that is what will actually take us out of this environmental situation to a better position.
Absolutely. Completely agree, sir. Completely agree. Yeah. Mr. Baba, so, over to you. I think Mr. Bhargava has obviously given you some sort of, issues to sort of maybe address as the system operator. And what are your sort of thoughts, as we kind of getting into the system? Is the preparedness there really for this unified system to come in place? Or do you find that there are sort of, still many moving parts that are not in place yet?
Okay. See, what Mr. Bhargava said is perfectly fine. There is no ambiguity in it. The topic of today is the decommissioning of the plants. And the point which you are asking is the optimization. Yes, we have to consider both. But one point is more important issue is what is to be decommissioned or what is to be considered. The one point which was not discussed so far is the resilience. In case of see, that point is, when if it is a pure economy, then there are certain like states, which some as mentioned, that why such a costly plants were made in a state. So there we have to see, apart from the economics, apart from the efficiency or flexibility or anything, one more aspect which is to be seen is the resilience. See, what happens is that suppose a state goes 100% on the imported power, something goes wrong, then there will be a catastrophe. So there has to be one aspect which needs to be built in the planning is the resiliency also. It is not pure, everything is not pure in all respects. Everything we have to take, there should be a starter, there should be everything dessert, everything should be there in a food. Similarly, a plant also, a state has to look for all the components. Some base has to be there, some flexible, some peaking, some planned for resilience. So everything has to be planned without any compromise, I feel. So while doing this transmission or resource planning, this also aspect has to be seen. So the one point which on the decommissioning point of it, you are trying to say. Then the next point which to be answered is the SCED. SCED, of course, you must have definitely seen our feedback to SCED, 2 feedbacks or 3 feedbacks we had given. Always had that intrastate also plants have to be incorporated, but it is in a phased manner. But there are certain prerequisites to it, that there should be an intrastate metering settlement system should be there, so that, and there should be a correct way of notifying the variable cost. There should be. That is it. These few systems, if they are in place, tomorrow we can have it, as simple as that. And one more thing, you must have definitely seen our feedback, where emission also can be in the GAMS, the software emissions also can be factored in. So therefore, there is no end, there is no limitation. As Mr. Mohit Bhargava rightly said, there is no difficulty in computing. It is the basic importance is that all these, everything should be in place so that ultimately what you do is one is the security, reliability. Then the another thing is the third last part is that the economic sharing also, and we have to capture all the points. That's why very important is that the settlement should be as peaceful as possible.
Sure.
Dispute free, I feel.
Absolutely.
So that's why. So POSOCO, we have been. One more thing is that we have been as part of the Santulan. You must have read a report, FOR report on Santulan. So we said that each state should have to have capability to implement SCED intrastate.
Right.
There are two things. One is a state,
absolutely,
and another is a center, and the third phase is put together.
Right.
So everything should be done in a phased manner. It is not that today I thought tomorrow it should happen. Not like that. Let's move phased way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Baba. Yeah, thank you so much. Ms. Chandra, your sort of preparedness of Punjab for the future of the system, given that some of your, in any case, already I understand some of these plants were, quite old. So, given that you will need more power, the water is only getting deeper and deeper. What is Punjab's plan to sort of really assess and address, its longer term needs for the state itself?
Yeah, we are looking into that. But before I answer that, I would like to say that once, we had decommissioned our plant at Bathinda, it was some 4 or 5 years before the end of its life. So remaining depreciation, because R&M had taken place in that plant, the efficiency had still not improved, but R&M had taken place. So we had to pass 500 crores of balance depreciation, plus the cost of people. You can't shift people just by saying tomorrow it is decommissioned, and where do you shift the people? They are individual profit centers. So, taking the people to other plants or to the distribution company takes some time. Thirdly, when you have a plant, you have a colony, you have schools, you have dispensary, you have other costs, which are associated with the plant. So when you decommission a plant, these still have to run. So, yes, it sounds simple that you decommission 25 years plant, but all these associated costs should also be taken into account when you decommission a plant. Secondly, we decommissioned all these plants, and when our supercritical units went off, we had to buy power on the exchange at 12 to 18 rupees. That cost has also to be seen by a state, like Mr. Baba said. The state has to think, where will it get power from? Once you decommission your own state plants, can you buy it on the exchange? Because ours was the paddy season from June to September, where our peak demand remains almost constant throughout the day and night. So at that 4 months paddy season, we have a very high demand. Rest of the time, we have say 6,000, 7,000 megawatt. But in paddy season, we have 14,000 megawatts. So if we decommission our plants, and how do we meet that? And if 1 or 2 units, forced outages are always there, units are in capital maintenance. So one has to plan to keep all these factors in mind, for future procurement. All renewable is coming in, maintaining flexibility. If we think of flexibility, then also we have to maintain some thermal plants for ramping up, ramping down. So it has to be seen in a multifaceted way, not only efficiency, but everything has to be seen.
Absolutely.
Right, ma'am. Because we really bought power at very high rates from the exchange when our units went down.
Yeah. I think I think the point that Mr. Baba made about resilience certainly is a valid one. But I think there has been no objective assessment of what is the resilience I think every state needs, Mr. Baba. So maybe I think, if states can sort of,
study should be conducted.
Done, right? So that then, exactly. Then I think we'll have more confidence that, we have what it takes to really sort of, then rely on these units and not rely on them.
Yeah.
So maybe that is something that is,
because, what will happen if the forced outages takes place?
Sure.
Decommissioning all state-owned plants is a bit difficult, but I think one of the medium solutions found was the scrapping of coal. These plants remain on bar, but the coal can be given now to the IPPs. So they run more efficiently. They use the coal, and our state plants, which are less efficient, they are in the, as a backup to the
Sure.
efficient plants.
Absolutely, yeah. Mr. Baba, you were saying something? Yeah.
No, I was trying to actually, Dr. Pradeep had mentioned one interesting point actually, is that decommissioned plants can be used as synchronous condensers, and we can make efficient use, effective utilization of those even decommissioned plants. So it is not to be written off in all respects. That's what I want. I mean, he made a very important point. So I thought let's just, strengthen what he says.
Yeah,
sure, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, great. Very quickly, Pradeep, given that there is this global push, for decarbonizing the grid, what do you think is the next step that like the likes of ADB and World Bank would like to see India do in pushing for the case for decommissioning, or just overall, bringing down the carbon intensity of the grid, really?
I suppose at the end of the day, the economics should prevail. And I think there are certain market failures and market imperfections, the way that the Indian power market operates, and that allows some of these inefficient plants to outcompete more efficient plants. These are due to market failures and to certain defects in the way the market operates at the moment, the suboptimal way of market operation. So if these can be removed, and if you can create a a national power market where the dispatching is done according to the variable cost or the thermal efficiency, I mean, that would basically show what are the plants that are redundant, that are not going to be utilized, and that are not going to be dispatched. I mean, some of them would have very low PLFs. I mean, they may be used only for emergency operations and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, so then I think the system operator can decide. Even the researchers, I suppose, based on the actual utilization rates, would be able to figure out what are the plants that are redundant. And even owners of these plants then would realize that it doesn't make sense to keep them in the system. I think as far as we are concerned, I suppose we are ready to support the government to come up with this kind of market structure. And then I think to deal with the cost of transition. I mean, cost of transition, I suppose, involves the human resource issue. And then how these assets can be, some of the features of these assets, like this synchronous condense operation, energy storage, transmission assets which are already there to serve these plants to be decommissioned, how they can be utilized. And then the wider impacts with the coal mining community. I mean, because at the end of the day, the coal mining or the coal demand would come down. I mean, the whole objective of this from a climate point of view is to reduce the coal utilization.
Right.
I think, the decommissioning of power plant is a means to that.
Sure.
And then I think because India is a relatively, coal dominant country, and then there would be certain socio-economic issues, I think, associated with this transition from coal. I think that's something I think we can support the government to address.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Pradeep. And Rohit, final word to you. So, you mentioned that, your state has gone from 1% to 4% in a very brief period. Do you envision that really, growing in a big way as, MBD rolls out, and also as your state starts looking at it? And is your state preparing really to really take on more energy from the outside in the exchange? Because as Ms. Chandra has pointed out, right, they've also burnt their fingers relying more on the exchange. Is that a trend that you see really, being cautiously used, or do you see that exploding in the case of Rajasthan?
No, that's something which we have been thinking over, and that goes back to the question which Mr. Baba also raised about resilience, because we are very conscious of the fact that more exposure to exchange sometimes might end up forcing us to buy costly power, especially the exchange. The way the market works is it's this it works on a game theory. So they see that how the states are buying power, and the moment the bidders get to know that a state is in desperate need of power. So we have seen that the prices also increase. So I think as we go ahead, our reliance on exchange would only deepen, but it could be more systematic, and it could be part of the planning, which of course we have been trying to do now every day. How much power to buy from exchange so as to replace it with the cheaper power if it is available in the market. But at the same time, we are also and any inputs on this would be really helpful, especially from your organization, on the question of resilience. And resilience includes not only the coal factor. It's not just the firm power which the coal provides, but it also is part of the energy security of the state, where you have less exposure to the imported power, as Mr. Baba or Chandraji was pointing out. So yeah, that's and as you mentioned, that there is no objective criteria on that. So that would be, and of course there cannot be, because the load profile of each state is different. But yeah, that is an exercise which we are doing now.
Great. I'm glad the state is getting into it. Let's see, whether we can actually work with the state of Rajasthan. We've seen interest from, but I think there needs to be sort of also central level interest. I don't think a state alone can drive this, perhaps. But with that, we'll draw to a conclusion. I think we're 35 minutes over time, and I'm so thankful to everyone who stayed through. Thank you to all the names. There are so many familiar names that I see there in the audience. I see some questions that have come from you as well. We didn't manage to sort of really get to every one of them, but we've made note of them. Some of them are anonymous question askers, but in the event that you wanted to sort of really direct it, please do send in your question. We'd be more than happy to try and answer it. But more importantly, please do take a look at the publications and the data that's been put out, and decide for yourself whether our assessment of an efficiency-based assessment is false, and at what level, and what needs to be fixed for. I think there definitely is a call for, I think not just the system operator, but perhaps somebody like the CEA working with the system operator to try and maybe do this assessment of what really is that resilient grid that India needs. Because I think behind this garb of resilience, we really have this, this bloated assets that we have, which I think is really weighing us down. And as we can see, the payments to that is really, I don't know who it's fattening up, but it's definitely lightening the wallets of the end consumers. Because with every passing year, notwithstanding, I think that slow decrease over time, utilities have been losing, lakhs of crores. If you can take that down by the tens of thousands of crores, I think more than useful. With that, I'd like to sort of formally thank, all of our panelists today, Dr. Pereira, Mr. Baba, Mr. Mohit Bhargava, as well as, Ms. Anjali Chandra and Rohit. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. I think some of them have actually had to leave because, it's well past. I'd also like to thank, the teams at CEEW that helped put this together, the outreach team, the researchers behind this, my colleague Dhanwant Narayanaswamy, as well as Nikhil Sharma, who is the co-author on the other study, as well as the many peer reviewers who gave us some critical comments. And I think we've not managed to address all of them because obviously some of you have raised some of those very pertinent points, which obviously are obvious loopholes in the study. But I hope, we sort of really look at this critically, this aspect, and look at more transparency in the way, some of the data that we've pulled together. I think this has been a more of an effort of really, pulling together this data than really doing the analysis. It shouldn't be the case. I think, our Indian system, given the amount of, what do you call it, transparency that's actually across the board, we can definitely make it easier for these kinds of analysis to come out. And I think for them to be seen objectively by every party involved. We hope that this study sort of really helps us move in that direction a little bit more. Specifically, on the financing part, which my colleague Weber was talking about, I think getting the information for even those 95 gigawatts worth of capacity was, I think, a phenomenal task, which some of our interns also helped accomplish. So we hope, all the readers find this, a little bit more enlightening and insightful, and, we get a lot more critical questions from you. Thank you so much for your time. We hope, to stay in touch with all of you as we sort of further this debate on, whether decommissioning is ready, is the right thing for India or not, and, what the alternative opportunities are. Thank you once again for your time, and thank you for staying through. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.